images to use, because I think all art comes from nature. And so I do I've been doing some portraits recently, and, well, apples are still part of nature. We have that.
Here, is this, you call this a portrait rather than...
It's closer, you know, well, I've done some self-portraits and portraits of other people, too, recently, and chairs and furniture, which to me relates to people.
So those are the more that's yours.
It's all of it, but, you know, but landscape, for me, I can do the most with it.
Do you paint just from going out into the landscape? Because this doesn't look like anything that we would have seen.
No, I hate painting outdoors. Just the opposite of my father, who likes to go out and sketch. You know, I go out, I take photographs, I'll make some sketches, but I'm impatient when I'm outside. I'm very distracted by the elements. And
so explain this then. How would you start something like this?
At this point, I was doing a lot of paintings dealing with opposites. And so this one, less than others, that would actually be, you can sort of see sort of daytime. And the one painting would go from night to day, and it'd be strange light sources.
But do you make these light sources up if you hate to be outside? Or have you gone out and seen them and then
on
come
this
back?
one, I did take a photograph of like a house up in Brentwood that had some of the light on the walls like that. And then I simplified the house. And then this I created for drama and to pull the eye in. And so I usually make them up, but I construct them. I put things together from different photos I've taken or images I've found in magazines.
Do you make an actual drawing with these images before?
I used to doodle them. Now I just sort of construct it in my head.
Oh, you do?
And then I'll just go straight on, and the little ones I'm doing now, I'll just go and paint it right on.
Tell us this again. What kind of material is it? It's canvas, I know.
Yeah. No, everything I've been doing is oil on canvas.
It's all oil?
Yeah. And it takes lots of layers of paint to build up the surface. A lot of underpainting.
But it doesn't even look like it's built up. It looks very flat.
Oh, because I paint very thin. So I do thin layers of glaze. And so, you know, anything might have 10 coats of paint, but they're quite thin.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And this, how would that... The point is, with young emerging artists, do you think that an artist needs a gallery, an art consultant, someone working for a private dealer?
Only thing an artist needs is good work. It's the only thing that seems to be lacking is good work.
But how do you get your good work out?
Who cares?
Just paint and paint, or work and work?
If you've got good work, they'll come to you. The real trick, if you want to call it a trick, if an artist has the work, they will come to you, because there are a few sophisticated people and quite a few artists around that have a network. And everybody is jealous. So once they see something that they like, they can't help but talk about it.
So the network is
funny.
what? Friends, other artists?
It's usually other artists. Basically, it's other artists, because you can't live in a vacuum and really survive. And the other artists they'll get it.
But I think that's one thing that you, more than anyone that I really know, has been behind the art movement, so to speak. You've been friendly. When I said you were a giver, you've been friendly with emerging artists, young artists. I mean, I remember meeting Chuck Arnoldi and Laddie Dill at your studio. They were in awe of you and the friends you were with. Ken Price, whom you mentioned, Bob Graham, Ed Moses. It was kind of a thing where you would bring these young artists in to be with, well, you weren't masters at that time, but you were painting a lot, all of you, or working a lot.
You know, if you just hang out with the same people all the time, you're going to get the same answers. It's nice to have the kids come up and have new answers or new questions.
Well, it could be pop in the sense that it's popular culture or
Yes.
popular icons. What I try to do, and what happened with the non-objective work, was I tried to take the work to a place where, not necessarily a layman per se, but there was a deja vu quality about the work, that the person already knew the story or some part of the symbol or some part of the image prior to confronting the piece.
Yeah, something like you do these static kind of objects like a chair. I mean, what can you do with a chair?
Well, the chair, basically the chair, again, that's a childhood image. In church, you would, while the adults were upstairs in church, you would be playing musical chairs downstairs, which was a very odd game because the whole purpose of the game was to bump everybody else off and sort of be the last person. So the musical chair image was the idea of that painting was hopefully the painting would be painted full size, the chair would be shown from 3/4 back view, and hopefully two people looking at the painting simultaneously would start noticing one another. The whole object of my paintings is hopefully to do a dialogue with the viewer so that they can sort of reflect as opposed to the monologue that I felt was happening with my abstract work where it was telling someone about what it was conceptually. I really want the viewer to sort of light the match. So the titles are important because they're sort of the introduction to the narrative. I don't know, I guess if I'd like to be illustrative Mark Twain or something.
I know, they all have a little story. Were you painting at the same time?
No, I wasn't.
So painting didn't even start until when?
1957 or 58, I think.
And how did it really actually happen if you were working in these kind of odd jobs?
Well, I think, you know, I met Ed Moses, who was trying to get back into UCLA, into the master's program, and they told him he had to spruce up his drawing.
Yes.
So he started studying privately with Howard Warshaw, who was kind of a drawer painter.
Yeah.
And one evening he was at our apartment, and I asked him, "Where are you going, Ed?" And he said, "I'm going to take my drawing lesson. You want to come along?" And I said, "Sure." And I went along, and Howard Warshaw pointed me to a cow skull and handed me a pen, and he said, "Start making lines." He says, "I don't care what they are, just start making lines in reference to this cow's head." And so I started doing it, and I loved it. And he said, "Looks fine, you're doing great. Keep up the good work." And then when he moved, he suggested that I enroll at UCLA in the graduate program.
So Howard Warshaw then moved back to San Francisco.
Santa
Is that
Barbara.
right? Oh, Santa Barbara.
Yeah.
Because he was very well known in the 60s as maybe even an artist. Now I can understand why people had this respect for him.
Mm-hmm. He was a tough guy.
Was he?
Oh,
So then you went to UCLA after that?
Yeah. And they made me take all the undergraduate courses, and that was it.
Did you, once you started painting, I mean, we talk about your career starting late in life. I guess you were, what, 32 or
Yes,
33?
about 32 or 33.
Nowadays, that really isn't late. I mean,
No.
we credit you with starting a career very late, and yet now artists are just
That's right.
finding themselves at 30, 32.
Mm-hmm.
Then you went into twigs. I mean, that's as far from what you're talking about, mixing materials.
Well, the thing about tree branches, I was, you know, it was early in my art school stuff, and I was out in Malibu after a fire, incidentally, and I was with another artist friend of mine, Jim Ganser, and we were stealing oranges from an orchard that didn't burn in this fire, and I noticed that all the trees around the orchard had burned, and the only thing that was left were the tree branches, and they were burned, they looked like perfectly drawn charcoal lines, and they were against the sky, and it was, the line quality was beautiful, but I didn't draw it, so I sort of broke them off and appropriated from nature in a sense, took it back to my studio and thought, God, these are beautiful lines, what can I do with them? So I played around and made linear constructions.
And that's what this piece is
this type of piece, yeah. That one is a little late. This is about the third generation of tree branch pieces.
You started painting these at that time.
These are painted in various ways. A piece like this is about 7 or 8 foot square, and they're painted in various ways. And I made them rectilinear or in that type of painting format so that they'd be hung on the wall. You stand in front of them and look at them like a painting. And it was an alternative way of making a hand-drawn or hand-brushed painting. And the tree branches led me to various other things like chainsaw paintings.
Which is something like this. Chainsaw, though, tree branches, were already pieces that you could pick up. Chainsaw was a different type of material.
Well,
Where did you get that?
Well, the thing is, if you make a mark with a paintbrush, it's a drawn line. If you take a tree branch, it's a three-dimensional object. It looks very much like that. It's in three dimensions. But in my twisted logic, I thought if I took a chainsaw and cut a negative hole in a piece of wood, I would have a line in the negative sense instead of in the positive, like a tree branch.
The San Francisco Museum, the women's group, decided to have a tour led by me through France. And it's the first museum tour that was ever organized, and I led it.
I see, because you had been living there. And
Yeah,
you knew
I've been
all
living
about...
there for 8 years.
I see.
And they thought, well, this is a good opportunity. Well, anyway, I did lead that tour through France, and when I had gone to Venice with my group, I took them to see the Peggy Guggenheim collection. And it was so interesting because I had met Peggy Guggenheim in New York at a certain time. And so when I went to see her, we renewed our acquaintance. And she was so happy that I led my group through her foundation, her museum and home. Well, after we had gone there, we went through her gates to get out.
Yes.
And she came up to me and went through the gates that were existing. And she said, now, Claire, be very careful when you go through these gates because they're wood with iron insets. And one of them did fall out. And if they hit you, they'll kill you.
Oh, wow.
And so I said, well, my. And she said, would you make me some new gates? And that's how I got the invitation.
And these gates, we have a picture of them. Tell us just what they're made of.
Well, I would have liked to have made them of copper. But Italy, I don't know why, they think copper isn't strong and they've got to use iron. So they're made of iron rod about 3/8 or 2/8, not quite a quarter of an inch. And I have a vocabulary that I have developed throughout my life. It's taken all my life to develop a vocabulary. And one part of my vocabulary is the never-ending screen.
Oh, yes, I forgot about
now,
that.
Well, anyway, that is finally what I used. But this is interesting because it took quite a while to finally bring those gates into fruition.
You know, I come from the north of England. I'm a very provincial person from the north of England. I was 18 years old when I first went to London. So when people tell me is LA an art city or not and stuff like that, it just means absolutely nothing to me, because when I was a kid, according to me, some of the great works of art of the 20th century came from Los Angeles. I was seeing them at the cinema. And to me, it obviously, therefore, was a big, creative place with all kinds of people in it. So when somebody said, are there any artists there, I assumed there were. So I've never... You know, as I say, when the art world tells you, well, it's not very important, I don't quite know what they mean. I'm not quite sure what they mean by art either. But, what more can I say?
You were painting Divine, and Divine fell asleep.
Divine absolutely fell asleep, and Divine's great dream was to be painted by David Hockney. So I was happy to arrange that. David came down and shared one of my sittings with Divine, and he enjoyed himself, so he invited Divine to sit for a painting in his studio. And then he asked me, would I like to come and share Divine as a model? So I did. And what was Divine doing, the great moment that he'd waited for? I arrived at David's studio, and Divine was absolutely asleep in the sitter's chair, sound asleep.
That is so typical, and it's so wonderful. I love these stories, and I know you could go on for hours about...
And the only thing that roused Divine was David's studio was near an outdoor hamburger stand, and they were frying potatoes. And suddenly, out of this deep sleep, Divine came to life and said, potatoes.
That was it.
Well, I work in a lot of different materials. I mean, the primary material is clay, but I've worked in cement and wood and bronze and plaster and various things. So it just depends.
So it really isn't, your forte really isn't just clay. So
No,
you're not just
no,
a
it's
clay.
multimedia. Multimedia.
I see. Do you paint as well?
I used to a long time ago. But
You had a commission. We're talking about commissions at the White House.
Yes. Yes, I was one of 14 potters selected from the United States to make dinnerware for the White House when Carter was president. And I didn't know where the dinnerware set was going. Ann Robbins of the Craft and Folk Art Museum called me one time and said, just trust me, trust me.
Oh, she just told you to go ahead and
make something.
I'm going to hold this plate.
Sure,
I'm sure this plate isn't like the dinnerware,
Right.
but it shows the type of work.
Right.
Is this?
No, that wasn't a white hair. I
But I
should
mean,
have
would it
brought
have
one,
been
but it was
this size?
porcelain, yes.
It was porcelain.
12
Porcelain's
inch.
different than...
Then stoneware. Stoneware has impurities in it. Porcelain is pure clay.
I see. And let's show the back too, because I think that porcelain's always white,
Yes,
clear.
right.
I
right.
see. Okay. All right. So what happened then?
It's so nice to be here, Joan.
so happy to
then
have
what
you.
happened? When? After the White House?
Yeah.
Well, nothing. It traveled. It was a traveling show.
Oh, it was.
And it went to the Smithsonian and the Contemporary Craft Museum in New York and various places across country.
You know, you've shown in more than 50 venues, all different kinds of art galleries,
Right.
museums, the Craft and Folk Art Museum, the Museum of Contemporary Crafts in New York, the
right.
Renwick,
Right.
all craft. I mean, you've shown at the LA County Museum
Right.
too, but I
Right.
mean, you've shown in a lot of craft museums. What's the difference, and how do you define your work as a craft or not craft? Or
I don't define my work as craft. I define it as art. I mean, it's work. It's my passion, and I think the labels really are silly. I mean, what's a craft? I mean,
I don't
there
know,
are
that's
wonderful things that are made by craftsmen all over the world, and I don't think they're less than what painters do with paintings or sculptors do.
But they're always put in a category,
I know,
aren't they?
I know, because cultures always want to pigeonhole everything. They want to put a label on something and neatly package it. And so we know that this is a drawer and we put that label on it.
Exactly,
So
right.
it's silly, but that's my point of view. So.
A series of red paintings.
Right.
And who could do a series of red paintings? I mean, you did, I don't know how many.
Too many.
A lot. You did a lot
yeah,
of them,
yeah.
20, 30, whatever. How can each red painting be different, or how do you talk about it?
Well, the thing is that I was trying to get someplace, but I didn't have a picture of it. So I have to start somewhere, and red was the kind of thing I was very interested in. I suddenly decided that the academic and the conventional color thing wasn't what I was, red, yellow, and blue, for example. That I was interested in the primal colors, black, red,
Yeah.
and a kind of institutional green that was a neutral zone. And in
Right.
Tibetan paintings for the environment or around the objects and the facts, there's this immaterial zone, and I call it an abstract zone because you can't relate to it in any way.
But
So-
does it have to be blank?
It implies blank,
I
the
see.
institutional green, because it's a non-referential color.
I see.
They used to use it in World War II in defense plants. They thought it was soothing to the eye, this green, and people started getting real crazy because they didn't have anything to relate to.
Because it was blank to them then.
Yeah, they wanted a little bit more feedback in terms of their environment. It was already rigorous enough, probably, right?
So how did you use it?
Well, I use it as the third possibility. You set up a context of two opposing things like red and black or whatever it is, and then they come together and this other thing happens, the whole catalyst idea, where you get two aliens coming together. Like in our Western life, we never get smart except by collision.
Right. So that's what happens with your painting.
Yeah, and there's a kind of collision of these two elements, and then this other thing happens, that the original guys lose their identity.
Well, how do you describe your work then? How would you describe it?
Boy, I don't know. I don't think I could describe it. Because it comes about through this contradictions situation.
It's not really abstract then in your mind.
Right. It isn't abstract.
It is not
Well,
abstract.
I've been torn between is painting as a physical fact in this two-dimensional situation called a plane, and the artists call it a plane anyway, and one where the canvas is a pictorial place. It's a picture of something else. So one where it's a hard physical thing, and the other one where it's a picture plane. And the collision of these two things has always intrigued me all of my life.
So that's really not abstract. In a way, it's like you're giving us concrete things to look at.
Well, it's concrete and it's pictorial.
I see.
And the two things sort of rack back and forth, and it's that I can't ally myself of one being the one.
I see.
Because they exist.
I see.
Along with several others.
So we have to look for that. The next time we see your paintings, we have to look for this collision, and we have to know that it's Ed Moses, and what's working in your mind.
Well,
the issue of what to be and how to proceed was very messed up. I mean, it was a bad time for my family, and I remembered that one of the nicest things I ever did was play with these blocks, and I said maybe I should try something in that arena.
Really?
And it was just an intuition.
Huh.
I was lucky too.
Did you think you would draw? Or were you going to be an artist?
No.
I mean,
I loved art. My mother took me to the museum in Toronto when I was a kid, and I loved art. And you know me well enough to know that I have put painters on the highest pedestal. I think they're above human, and I treat them like that, which is bad.
I know you do, because you have such great respect, but I think in turn...
So I would never paint.
You would never paint, but
No.
they think of you in the same way, because their work is enclosed in a building, and your work is what encloses that.
Right.
And I think you're probably the best kind of person to work with an artist, because you want their work to show the best.
Right.
But your work is art on the outside as you're driving down the street. I mean, do you
It's
ever...
become, people say that, I guess.
I know, but do you ever drive around and say, oh my gosh, look at my piece? I mean, does it ever shock you when you see your work?
No.
It doesn't? You
No.
just...
But see, you got to understand that my logic systems that I've built up over the years seem very normal to me. So everything I do seems very normal, and I can't understand why people think it's strange or different.
Or rebellious, that's what I like.
Yeah, because it doesn't make sense in my head.
I see.
Now afterwards, I mean, it's happened enough times that I'm not naive, so I say, yeah, I guess they got a point, and I try to figure it out now, but...
Well, that figuring out what you were doing has gotten you, like, I don't know, hundreds, almost 100 awards from one situation to another.
More than anybody deserves in a lifetime.
No, including.
fine.
Some people do say your work is junk,
That's
but you
true.
called it junk yourself.
That's right,
So where do you find the junk, and how do you really qualify it as being art?
Well, that's the trick to turn, you see, to take something that's called alchemy. You know, how you take something that is gross or dross and make it fine, you know, and sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. When you've been doing this for 30 years, I sort of spiral out from my studio downtown to junkyards for public art commissions. But after 30 years, people are sending you things in the mail. You're receiving like this box.
I was going to ask you if anyone sends you something, and if you do use it.
Oh yes, yes. These are gifts. See, what they miss out is the joy of discovery when you work with found objects. That's a big deal. So what I have to do is say thank you very much, and then hide it from myself. And years later or months later, I come across it in the studio, and I say, aha, look at that. That's far out. Yeah, that's far out.
Oh, so what did somebody send you?
Now, this is from a man named Creative Thing. That's what he works under. And he sent me 2 beautiful gloves, bicycle racing gloves. Now, where these will go, I have no idea. You know, we had talked about my bringing in a maquette for a public art sculpture, and I really don't make maquettes. I'm kind of a maquette-me-not person. I make things afterwards.
Build as you go.
Yes, and so I did bring you, you know, some items, and this is how I would build something, you know, for you if I could. Now, this can would come from, say, the High Desert by Joshua Tree, and probably the same source for this tin can lid.
But once you get these things that you found home, you remember where they all came from?
Sometimes, yeah. It's a this comes from Philadelphia, an inner city school where I was an artist in residence.
You have done a lot of artist in residence throughout the country, but do you pack this in your bag and bring it home?
This is all I brought. I was there for 1 week, and we did 10 sculptures, the students and I.
So you taught them.
And this was a little bit that I brought home with me. So somehow I saw these gloves and this. I don't know how this is going to work, Joan, but you know, something like that. That's more or less how I work. You know, the things already exist, and they come to me through luck, through chance. It's on my path through life.
Is that? Well, you talked about being an abstract painter. What is the name of this painting that's here? And what does it tell us? What do all these lines mean? How do you tell a story in this abstract kind of way?
This painting is the name of this painting is Mr. Charles. It was painted in 1987, and it was painted for my great friend Charles Whitehead, who was a chauffeur and who lost the use of his legs in an automobile accident. And Charles was one of those people who, upon receiving this serious blow to his life, just showed us all, you know, the kind of perseverance that you don't think you have in you until something like this happens. And most of us don't think we have it when something like this happens. But this guy never complained. He never gave it a single moment's thought that he wouldn't be able to go on and be a vibrant person in life. And so when I tell a story in this, these lines, the color, to me represents the spirit of Charles, you know, the motion. And there's a space for abstract painters that is created in the process of painting that there's a depth in the painting and there's a depth in the human being.
So you actually are telling a story, but how does the public relate to this? If you didn't tell us the story of that, I would look at it and say, I love the color, I love the depth, and this is really interesting the way he's done these. I thought they were African symbols.
Yes.
Are they?
They're not, but they're based on African symbols.
And that's all I would get out of it. I wouldn't know the story of him.
I think that the intensity of my emotion in the process of painting is what comes through in the painting. And the fact that I name the painting after a person who has given me so much relates to the viewer in the sense that they get that intensity.
So they feel, if you like it, it's something that you feel, or you can see what the artist has put into it.
Yes.
This is something new to me, this big painting on the set. I haven't seen this work, and it looks almost representational, and I thought all you did was abstract work.
Well, this is from an earlier period when, for me, there was more of an interest in color field painting, more of an interest in symbolism. I started out by studying African systems of symbols, and at a certain point I realized that I was going to have to create my own body of symbolism. And this painting is basically, the name of it is Team Picture, and it's about my family, because my father always referred to our family as the team.
I see.
And so the symbols in it, especially the representational ones, are about things that he touched or that my mother touched
I see.
in their everyday working life.
I see.
Yes.
The other thing, these look to me, and I know they are, there's an artist in town, very, very good artist named Ed Moses. I think you started painting these. I don't know, did you know him? Oh, by accident.
No, I just had met him, and Ella, the wife of Brian Auger, I just saw her trying to do a drawing of Ed Moses, and she showed it to me, and then it hit me. I didn't like her drawing. And I went back home, and I thought that he deserved better treatment. I liked his look, and I just began doing a portrait and then another one, and I did many of him.
So we have two here.
You have two here, but I did maybe 70 or 80 portraits of Moses with drawings, maybe more even.
Did he ever sit for you?
No, never. I don't need him to sit.
Is that, well, how does that happen? Where does the inspiration
come? A visual accident. I think my eye clicked, and it was kind of an immediate photography.
And
I
you
don't
just
know,
kept it, different
and from
colors,
time
different
to time,
sizes?
From time to time, even if I'm doing something totally different, he comes back, but in different shapes, and that's fine.
And this behind you is a self-portrait. It's wonderful.
It is a very old self-portrait. I did it during the 6-day war, in fact, in Beirut I was.
You were there at the time?
I was there at the time, and yeah, that's when I did it.
What about your favorite media? What do you like to work in since you've sculpted and designed?
Life is my best media. I think so.
Do you like to work on canvas? Or?
I like to work on anything that falls under my hand.
Is that right?
Yeah.
What about future as far as shows, or what type of work will you be producing in the future?
I just finished a show in Beirut. It was the first time I went there in 21 years. I had my first show, and it was a very important exhibition. On the 1st of June, I just am back out of it, and the next project would be an exhibition in Israel. I would be the first Arab artist to go there. I could go there with my French passport, and I'd like to do it because I think that art should go always further and quicker than politics.
That's the way to break through the politics.
I feel that very strongly.
So they're called flat paintings. Are they minimal? Is that how we would explain them?
This is great. Someone just gave me a book, Kenneth Baker, Minimal Art. It's this big book. And in it, he just talks about the term minimal was first John Graham, an American expatriate living in Paris. He develops the ideology, and Baker talks about how he never really fulfills it. His paintings came nothing close. And then he goes on to say that the two artists that came closest were Bryce Martin in New York and James Hayward in Los Angeles.
Is that right?
I was amazed. I bought 10 copies, you know. Gave one to my mom. Look, Mom.
When we talked about minimalism, you said, no, it's reductive.
Minimal has always seemed to me more sculptural. Reductive seems to be, in my own work, it's not based on any philosophy. It's just this conscious desire to get rid of the extraneous. And there's, you know, my life is so full of extraneous, and I think yours might be too.
No, we don't want anyone to hear that. I couldn't get rid of anything, though.
Well, see, if you painted, you could. You can just start eliminating things, and it's, you know, things that don't need to be there. Paintings are always, every painting's a shape and a surface and color for the whole tradition, back, you know, hundreds of years. But when you add something, I hope you have a really good reason, because it just slows the paint down. paint has been subjugated by human beings for hundreds of years. You know, it's inherently beautiful stuff, and people do the ugliest stuff with it.
But you can't call your, or can you call your work abstract then?
So the white paintings, the white squares from '79 were, I think, the most abstract paintings I ever did. They're the most fragile. They all ended up almost being alike.
But that's the next thing. They were all just white, just a surface painted white.
The previous ones, well, they were in shows where there was natural light and gallery light. I came into a room one day and there's 3 women arguing about whether the pink one is more beautiful than the blue one. And it was just the light. They both had the qualities to be either.
They were both white.
Yeah, they both had red, yellow, blue in them. So I just moved them, and the one that had been pink was now blue, and the one that had been blue was now pink. And I just left the room because both paintings had those properties. They live in light.
So was it a good move coming to LA?
Yeah, it was. I moved up here. My wife was pregnant, and we didn't really have a place to live. But Laddie and Chuck were really helpful. They helped me find a place in the building where they were, which was convenient for them because I got to work for them. And we made the transition pretty easily, and it was a good thing because it made me sort of take it. I decided to become real serious about making art then, I think.
You used really unconventional methods when you first started putting things on canvas, say.
Yeah, I was, you know, everything was so traditional, and it was sort of coming out of the post-conceptual 60s. So, and painting was dead, I was told by a lot of people. So, you know, I decided to paint in a different way. I like primitive painting, and I started using, instead of brushes, I started using sticks and nails.
I brought some sticks, actually, to show. But those paintings that are on the set are made.
Well, yeah, these are the stirring sticks, actually, and a lot of times what I'll do is I'll take sticks like this and make the larger strokes, and then make, well, this one has a little cap on it. Make sort of like the larger strokes with this, and then take like these little nails, because I was doing a lot of construction then for a lot of different people, and pull the paint wet into wet.
And it shows in the painting that they're seeing now, how the nails are being pulled. And you used...
Yeah, these are all these coffee cans that I would get from all my friends, and I ended up, these became really popular.
But what'd you do, just mix the paint and coffee cans?
Yeah, I just mixed the paint and coffee cans.
And then dump it?
And then pour it out, yeah. They were just sort of like a little apothecary jar here, just mix the paint up. And it had a consistency of a milkshake, and then sort of pouring it out in either a circle or a square or a triangle. And then using the other sticks to sort of pull the colors wet into wet.
What other kinds of materials did you use?
Well, I started to, I work on flat canvas initially, and then I wanted the paintings to become more physical because I really was very interested in Frank Stella and the relief type painting he was doing. So I discovered this stuff called polyurethane foam, which,
and that's
yeah, it was just like this little critter down here, my buffalo that I just made in Yellowstone. And it was a way of taking the paintings and making them more theatrical, I guess is a good word.
But but instead of freestanding like the buffalo is, it was on the canvas.
Yeah, this is a good example. If you can imagine taking multiple shapes like this of different animals or plants or people. I was doing a lot of gang fight paintings, urban violence type thing, but in a funny kind of way. Superimposing these on top of one another and then creating like a dimensional kind of painting that had actually a sense of depth to them.
To me about Los Angeles is it has no history. It's a totally progressive place. Everyone who's traveled knows that every place has a sense of history, but this one seems to have the least. We're not tied by history, and it's a great place to leave every once in a while. But I think it's a working town. That's the thing that I like the best. There's almost an anonymity about being an artist here, which I like. It appeals to me. And then I prefer to show in other places, but work here. The climate's perfect for what I do. Real estate, when I was first looking for a studio, was relatively cheap. I don't know what it's like now.
Where was that very first place?
Downtown Los Angeles. I shared a studio with Chuck Arnoldi, actually. And I went to school down there at Chenard Art Institute, and then took a studio down there, and then moved to Venice in the early 70s, and I've been working in Venice ever since.
So you're very close to the water.
Yeah, close to the water. I grew up in Malibu, so it was I've always been on the water. Yeah.
How do you think those elements of sand, water, light have affected your work?
It's the light elements, I think, that have affected my work the most. Early on, I had a particular interest in light and how light reflects, refracts, how it interacts with objects, and the coloration of light and things like that. My father was a lens designer, and so there was an interest in refraction of light through his interests. So I always was particularly interested in the way the light refracted in an atmosphere, what I would call residual light, and made early pieces of sculpture that worked in twilight light, so that you had illuminated surfaces and you had a residual light that came from kind of an ambient light.
What would a luminous light be that you were working with?
Well, for instance, at twilight, you have a light where the focus of objects becomes kind of marginal. The light is only strong enough to allow illuminated objects to come into focus, and I started playing with that phenomenon.
So you illuminated the objects?
The objects that I illuminated became in focus. The objects that I did not illuminate, even though you could see them, were less in focus.
Is that a period when you started working with this vapor? You started making pieces of glass that are standing figures then. You were plating the glass or coating the glass?
Yes. The standing pieces were an extension of the smaller cubes. I wanted to do larger sculptures that were environmental, that you could walk around, that rather than just small little things. And so essentially, I used to think of them as the cubes, except opened up, where I took the right angles of the cube and just made them 90 degrees to the floor and 90 degrees to each other,
and they stood?
Yeah, they stood on the floor and you walked around them, and they altered the way the light was reflected or transmitted in that environment.
So the basis of what you were trying to show was light, space, working with those?
Yes, I used to think of the pieces as sort of three-dimensional tapestries of reflected and transmitted light. And the newer work that I'm doing now are really tapestries of absorbed and reflected light.
Well, as a teenager, she returned to California, went to Santa Monica High School and UCLA. She's shown in galleries and museums around the world, but not just on canvas. She's done a lot of installations of different types. When you started working, Lita, did you think you were going to be doing installations or working on canvas?
No, I had no idea. I thought that I would just be working on canvas. I thought I'd be a straight painter. And then I think the influence of having been raised in North Africa, coupled with what was going on in the art world at that time, which was Robert Irwin, Smithson, Michael Heiser.
Were those people at UCLA when you were there?
No, they weren't
just
there.
Watching?
But they were, yeah, exactly. Had they not been doing land art, I would have never gone out, I don't think, in the environment. That was a very big influence.
Oh, but how did you think you could manage it? It's so ephemeral.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't put your hands on anything, can you?
No, no. In fact, it's so ephemeral that the wind blows it sometimes.
Oh, there.
So, but interestingly enough, since I was doing these ephemeral pieces out in the desert, I then was asked to do I did a piece around the Washington Monument, and then Jack Glenn, who was my dealer at the time, wanted me to do an obelisk for a civic center outside of Las Vegas.
So this is a desert piece.
Yeah, those are the ephemeral pieces I did in the 70s.
Is
with,
that right?
With powdered pigment, yeah.
And then who would come and see something like this?
Well, there were certainly the crew was all there. Sometimes I would have some people out there. Mainly people saw it through documentation.
But that's basically what it was, documentation?
Yes.
Is the next piece too. I might as well show the next piece in this catalog, because this also reminds me of that Irwin kind of light and centering, but this is inside.
This is inside. This was done for the Hirshhorn Museum in 1981, and it's a 3-foot tall rock just with powder pigment on top of it. And the circle that you're seeing is actually a copper ring. It's about 900 feet. 900 feet, 900 pounds, and it's cantilevered off the wall at the angle of the axis of the Earth.
Can you ever use this installation somewhere else? Would you ever use it, or is it just for a specific space?
It's pretty specific.
Oh, you did think that.
So when I came to California, I thought, well, these guys have opened up the situation. They're really involved with the environment, and it was a kind of popish phenomena, and they extended it into the realm of, art. They really did.
But you say these guys.
Well, it was mostly guys. Yes, it was mostly guys. There seemed to be very few women that were kind of riding the wave, except for the feminist movement.
Yeah.
So I came out because of the feminist movement.
I see.
And, I was accepted by those guys. And, actually you and Jack.
Exactly.
I mean, you seem to be the sort of people that were listening to everyone and helped them. I mean, both of you were like the mom and pop or the sister and brother of that whole scene.
But it didn't seem unnatural. It seemed normal.
It seemed normal
when you came. But you came from a really closed situation, didn't you, to California, and it was very open. I thought it was open.
There was CalArts,
Right.
that had people from everywhere,
Right.
and particularly from the coast too, and wealthy. Some of them weren't, but they were all specifically interested in art. So,
but they talk about you as being such a feminist, but I never thought of you as a feminist. I mean, I thought of you as a thinker, a person who
I
does
felt
something.
that,
Yeah.
and I felt, well, this is a really important movement. I just didn't feel like going to the meetings. I didn't feel like
exactly.
Obviously, I wasn't going to deny. I'm a woman, but I would beg the question. I would philosophically beg the question. When Lynda Nochlin said, "Why are there no great women artists?" I thought it was a mistake to even answer it.
Exactly.
You empower yourself if you do.
Right.
And
people.
I've known you for many years, and I've seen your work progress, and a lot of different materials. You used like found paper. I called it found paper. I don't know, for want of a better word, collages. Tell us how you started on. You used acrylics.
Yeah, well, the found paper ones were. I went to all these. What am I trying to say? The poster factories.
Right.
The people who printed the big billboards, and you get. They're an amalgam of maybe 40 images to create one singular image, and they would have their overruns and their cancel sheets, and I would sort of ask them if I could raid their trash, and then I would bring them back to the studio, and they were already altered to a state where they were unrecognizable because they'd be like a 2-color run out of a 6-color run.
Oh,
so
I see.
I would sort of use that and then take that as a jumping point, just as a reference point to move that abstraction, which has already started because they were canceled and mistakes or things.
But you already you used actually that material in your work.
Yeah, for a while, for a couple years.
And then you used postcards, I know.
I've always done little tiny collages out of postcards, sort of as little notations on, not so much where I am, but what I feel about where I am at that time from different images.
But you alter them as well, right?
Yeah, usually they're manipulated one way or another.
But are these things termed as archival? Because people always think about art, they want something archival.
Like any paper, it's less archival than, say, the paintings that are here. Yeah, I mean, you've got any printed image, you've got to keep it out of the light. I mean, even watercolors, everything. Yeah.
You use tissue paper. You used
in those early paintings, you had to sort of build up the surface. Yeah, because the first paintings were very sort of surface oriented, but the surface itself was actually very smooth. But then I became more involved in, like, these paintings are a series of sort of evolution of different materials.
And then where did you move? You moved from all those different kinds of collages into painting on wood or painting on canvas.
Right. Well, I started at that, but at that time in school, there was a big emphasis of going off the stretcher and into materials, and it was right after a lot of people were experimenting with light and space and acrylics, and I mean, not acrylics, but
plastic, I was thinking,
resins
weren't you?
and everything.
Resins, yeah.
And we were all influenced by, everybody was sort of spreading out and using different materials. So I actually created sort of my own surfaces out of tissue paper and gauze and Roplex and made skins that were later mounted and things.
I see, that's how that happened then. And then, where are you now?
Well, I think
career-wise.
Well, no, but as a student and everything, I mean, you're exposed, and then you start to reach around and grab and test everything. And I've settled down, and I've been using basically the same sort of process, if you want to call it that, or set of materials for the last 8 or 9 years.
And what set of materials is that?
Well, like in these, it's all either on wood or canvas, and I sort of start off with it's like a dry fresco, a secco.
So this is
plaster ground.
I mean, if you're going to do sunsets, there's no reason why you can't do it on velvet. I mean, that was my logic. I mean, in other words, the whole idea of doing a sunset was absurd enough that it wasn't any more absurd to do it on black velvet.
I see.
I mean, that to me seemed completely consistent. The other thing is that the material is so seductive, that is the velvet, and it's the blackest black that I could find. And so what I did, instead of painting on it, that is by trying to avoid, the Tijuana Association. I mean, I was naive enough to think that I could avoid it, by putting metal flake and things like that on it. But that's where the velvet started.
But what did you put on it? You didn't paint on it. How did you make those velvet sunsets?
I used stencils, spray cans, and metal flake, things like that.
And then you went on and actually started collaging velvet.
Yeah, but that came later, and that was a result of other sort of images.
Okay, so let's go on then from black velvet.
Okay, after the velvets, then I went back to the sunsets again and did a few paintings, which is the first time I'd ever sort of done actual paintings of it. And then...
so that's where we got the 10 years. We have a span.
Yeah.
You did something else in between.
Yeah, and then in the late 70s, in early 80s, I started going back to the velvets again. And those particular ones were the ones that were collaged.
And how, when you talk about collaging a velvet, what did you put on it?
Bits and pieces of stuff. Like I go down to, there's a place in downtown Los Angeles where you get costume jewelry. I forget the name of it, in fact, but I'm sure you've been there, Joan. And I'd get all the stuff and just sort of put it on. But the image was bottom of the ocean at night. That's where the idea, that's why I came back to the velvets.
To collage.
To do the collage stuff, yeah.
And did you actually sew the pieces on?
No.
What did you do?
No, I just sort of pin it up on the wall, and then I'd have my assistant would come in and sort of pin them directly to the fabric and then sew them. If they were sewn, I wouldn't take them off. If I had to do the sewing,
I see.
And I'd never take them off. And I don't have the patience to do it anyway.
Okay, then where did we go?
Then I went to India.
Then I was just going to ask you. You lived in India because I visited you in India,
right?
And your work changed tremendously there.
Well, that was because they didn't have any velvet.
What happened with was it the FBI?
No, it was actually the Secret Service came to my studio door one morning and said, you have to come downtown with us because you're counterfeiting. So my wife and I went down to the Federal Building in Los Angeles.
Counterfeiting on these huge things?
I had, I committed a crime by painting these large paintings of bills. And they were very serious, and we spent the entire day down there, and they kind of tried to intimidate me and say all these things about the law, and brought out the letter of the law and read it to me. And I didn't take them seriously, but they were very serious. And then they said they were going to confiscate all the work at museums. And
then how did it clear up?
Well, they did keep some work. I have a receipt for contraband. They had some drawings they kept, told me not to paint money anymore, and let me go home.
But did you continue to paint money?
Of course.
One thing that came out of it was a great thumbprint painting that you did.
Yeah, my reaction to all of that was later on, the day or two after, was some sense of outrage, and I think the thumbprint became symbolic of that kind of.
We also have photographer, artist Stephen Arnold. Stephen was born in Berkeley and spent most of his years in school in the Bay Area. He was lucky enough to have a scholarship to the San Francisco Art Institute, where he obtained a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in fine arts. Stephen is really known for his innovative photographs, imaginative, and I don't know what else to say, Stephen, but
Mad,
welcome.
maybe mad.
At one point you said you always wanted to be a painter, but here we are with photography as the main core of your existence.
Well, my photographs are more painterly than my paintings, I think. Somehow they cross over, and they come from drawings, and I plan them all first, so maybe they're the same. I mean, they mean the same to me as paintings.
I understand as a child in the attic of your home, you always were building your little puppet stages and little tableaus at a very early age.
My whole childhood I spent hiding in the attic, making puppets, building sets, making costumes and putting on shows.
With the same media for the whole lifetime, which is what you're talking about, I think.
I believe, again, and I don't mean to sound redundant, but it really is the case, it's a matter of temperament, you know. And as you know, earlier on, I did very different work. The way the way my career was inaugurated were with those perforated paper paintings.
We have one of those on the set, so we'll show that, and you can talk about that.
Okay.
At the time when you were doing those perforated pieces, I didn't realize that you were painting the paper as well.
Yeah, well, I was already painting then, but you know, ultimately they were really very elaborate design projects. And the time came when I realized that there was another part of my temperament, that my creativity that did not have a chance to be expressed because of the constraints of that work. You know, everything had to be designed ahead of time and then pretty much manufactured, you know, crafted. There was very little room for spontaneity or for change.
So you were painting the
Yes, but in a very restricted fashion.
I see.
And, you know, symbolically, you know, if I would mix the colors, if there was a red, I sometimes would decide that even though the shape was a triangle, I would say, well, I have this rose here in my studio and I'm going to paint the color, you know, I will mix the color that way. So although they were abstract and they were highly designed, they already had one could say, a narrative quality to them, these pieces. You know, clearly this piece that I brought in today is really a facsimile of the works I used to do.
We talked about, I talked with you about this, about how an artist has their touch on each thing when they make a piece. It's, you either see the color or you see something that speaks of the artist. And I always think Tony Berlant speaks of these nail heads, and I often wonder if you have a pattern that fits into your work. You can see all the little nail heads on here.
Well, the pattern is just like the pattern of the brush strokes if you're painting, or the pencil marks if you're drawing. It's just the rhythmic building motion. The nails are necessary to hold the thing together. So there is a pattern, but it's that kind of echo of it speaks of the unseen hand of the artist. You get that sense of the presence of the maker.
I know you made a lot of these houses. I guess they're called houses. I don't know for what you call them, but they always have little intriguing things about them. This has the it has pancakes.
Heavenly pancakes.
Heavenly
Levitating pancakes.
Heavenly. But take us through the process of what this is, what kind of frame this is, how you start, and how you got to the pancakes.
It's built over a wooden form, and this particular piece is a piece that has to do with sort of domestic experience. It has...
and then are all the forms obviously different sizes, because you make different size houses?
Yeah, each one is individually.
And then how does the metal give us
I have all these bits and snippets of found things that are piled up, thousands of them in my studio, as you know. It's just big heaps of junk, and I just sort of shuffle around in there and push through the things until I find images or color that I respond to, and I put one piece down, and then I go back into the piles of material and look, and then I find the next thing that I respond to.
And then how
I just put them together like that until the whole piece is some kind of presence or statement that reveals itself to me.
You use tin snippers,
Little
because I've
tin
seen you
snips,
work, and
yeah.
you wear something on your eyes.
No, just tin snips and a hammer,
and that's
it's
it?
very, very simple technique in terms of the tools.
But my preoccupation has been the edge.
The edge,
In
I
other
see.
words,
And this is the edge that we just,
yeah. What happens to a painting when you run out of painting and you get to that edge and you come around and you look at it from the side? And that really has been really my pursuit. And I've worked with that in one way or the other since the early 1970s. Yes, there you go.
Here's another piece talking about on
and so
the edge,
the
right?
dark edge there is actually a shadow, but at the top of this shape or
The
this
pointed,
painting,
yeah.
it's touching the wall. So if you're facing the painting front on, it looks like maybe it's a normal painting. If you move across the painting, if you move from one side to the other, it's changing its shape and it's changing how it relates to the wall.
Here's an example of
One of the very
right?
first paintings. And on this painting on the right, it has a wood edge.
Oh, you have a wood edge. It's like a frame in a way,
Like a
right?
frame, but the frame became, for me anyway, the frame became pretty much the content of the painting because I shaped that frame.
The interesting thing is when you talk about that, because I don't think we think about going off the edge of the painting because we always put a frame on it.
Exactly.
So you don't look around the edge. But yesterday I was with a painter and he had just finished my portrait, Jean Kazanjian, and he said, you're free to take this home now. And I looked at it and he said, oh no, I want to paint the edges. I don't want you to frame it. So he says, I want to take it around the canvas. And you're saying the same thing. We never look at it from that point of view. It stops.
Yeah, that's right. And because a painting is a two-dimensional.
Right.
But what has always been my interest is merging and integrating the real space with this two-dimensional space. And so I've spent a lot of time thinking and worrying and
Downtown, you said, I live among the freeways and the high-rise structures. My sculpture is a reflection of that environment, an attempt to distill the urban landscape. And I guess that's what you're talking about. You use a combination of pulls and pushes and...
Like I don't know if you can pick this up on the camera, but say these brown linear elements represent rectangular steel tubes that convolute and wrap around one another in a very, for me, a very tension-filled structure, much like the one-way streets and no left turns and sort of the urban mapping of downtown. And for me, that downtown and these structures really produced a very tight, tension-filled system. And what I wanted to do is invade that with what I felt not only relieved that tension, but was just totally inappropriate for this tight geometry, something very unexpected that would jostle your expectations. And hence, this marriage of what I consider to be two extremes, this tight steel geometry and these precarious-looking but very solidly anchored boulders in reality and little pebbles in these scale models.
And then